There are so many service members and veterans in the United States of America that come from all sorts of backgrounds and a heritage, but one thing they all have in common is that each sacrificed their time and effort, some more than others, to protect and help America. This leads to the veteran named Robert Edris. Airman First Class Robert Gary Edris served as a jet engine mechanic in the Military Air Transport Service 438th, a military air command during 1963 to 1967. Robert Edris was born in Lebanon, Pennsylvania to Dorothy and Miles Edris in 1945. He went to Northern Lebanon High School and worked for a commercial refrigeration company before he would enlist to the United States military in 1963. He enlisted in the United States Air Force because of what his friends and his father had told him.
Well, my father had always said it would be a good idea to do it if you don't know what you're going to do with your life. And I was uncertain at the time, so I joined the United States Air Force. Because talking to some of my older friends, they always said, whatever you do, don't go in the Army or don't be drafted. So I chose the United States Air Force.
Once he enlisted, he was then flown to Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas for his basic training.
Uh, Staff car from the recruiter office to Harrisburg International Airport, and there I got on a plane, flew me to New York City, and then from New York City they flew me to San Antonio, Texas, to where I took my boot camp. Oh, the best part was probably how I really learned a lot of discipline and got to know what the American services were like. I personally would say I didn't really have a bad part because I sort of enjoyed all of it, everywhere I was and everything I did.
After he had completed basic training, he then went to Chanute Air Force Base to do what he said was like a second boot camp.
The Air Force at that time had what they call a second boot camp, where you went to the base where your training was going to be held, which mine was in Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, and there we did different things like marching and basically went over what we went over before and did a week's work of KP, and then we were assigned to our school.
After he had completed all of his basic training, he was then able to start his job training, which was to become a jet engine mechanic. He started off taking a jet engine mechanics course, which he described as the following.
You started with knowing what the basic engine was, what the operations of it was, how to rebuild, and then how to put it on the aircraft, and all the way through till it was on the aircraft, and then you learned how to run the aircraft and till it was all together and flying.
After he had completed the jet engine's mechanic course, he was then sent to his first permanent duty station, which was McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. There he learned how to operate various vehicles and advance in his job.
Yes, after I got put at my first permanent station, uh, I became a truck driver to drive my flight line team around to different jobs. I just drove them there, went and got their tools and things like that for the first couple of weeks, and then I got on a crew of my own, and I went to the flight simulator to learn how to run a C-135, and after I received my gun license, I was then awarded a crew of my own, which we'd go out and diagnose the problems, and we would do what had to be fixed, and then I would go in the cockpit and start the engines and check it out and make sure everything was to government specs, and uh, and then you would sign it off, and the plane was ready to fly.
During his time in the service, he would go on to reach the rank of Airman First Class.
My normal uh, time and grade uh, steps.
Could you tell me about that?
Well, you had to put so many months in as an airman, and then you got to be an airman third. After so many months, then you were qualified to be an airman second, and then in my 4 years, you could go as high as airman first. And before I was discharged, they changed the airman first to a sergeant. But that's as far as I went.
During his time in the service, he would get to travel to many different places around the world and have many different experiences.
Well, like I stated before, I left Lebanon County and wound up in San Antonio, Texas, and then I went to Chinook Field, and then I got stationed in McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey, which I stayed the rest of my time there. And while I was there, being my job would take us other places, I went temporary duty to Hawaii, Norway, Germany. Right now I'm lost, but well, I was in quite a few bases in the United States, always to fix uh, aircraft C-135, the A and B models, and KC-135s, which was my specialty. And I did have to go to the Hawaiian tour to support the Vietnam mission, so I was there to fix any of our squadron planes that was traveling to Vietnam and the surrounding area.
His stay at the Norwegian Air Force Base would prove to be the most different change of living standards during his service.
When I spent months in Norway, we had to live under the Norwegian standards, and wasn't what the United States standards were. Although we got a little extra pay for living like that, we had to eat their foods, which wasn't the best. We had to sleep in their quarters, which the beds were nothing but chains and scraps and feather ticks, and they weren't to our standards either. But all in all, it was a good time.
During his time in service, he would have free time to play various sports and visit places around the base with his friends.
I played a little softball, a little hardball. We played soccer. Uh, we went off the post or bases, maybe to visit the areas we're in, just to see different parts of the country, which was fun. There was beaches and mountains and things everywhere you went. It was something different, but while you were there, you might as well, if you had the time, it was a good time to see it.
When asked what his best part of his service was, he said that it was the day he got discharged from the Air Force.
Saying something, I would say the best part was probably the day I got discharged. it was a happy time, but no, I enjoyed my whole time in in the Air Force. I would suggest it to any young person to do something like I did. 2 days before my discharge, I was still in Hawaii, and they knew I had to be discharged by that Friday, and it was Thursday, and I got on a KC 135 in Hawaii, flew nonstop to Pease Air Force Base, New Hampshire, and from there I got off the KC 135 and got on a C 130 weather plane going to Florida, and they dropped me off in McBar Air Force Base, New Jersey, and from there I went to see my commanding officer, and from there I went to finance, and from there I went home. It was that quick.
His largest highlight of his career was when he met President Lyndon B. Johnson when the Air Force One needed repairs.
And the aircraft, which was a C 135, that I was trained to work on, and that's what Air Force One was at the time. And it was because it had boarded from another on flight into the post I was at, and I was, they said I was the most qualified man to work on that plane. So that was there at the time. So I went and did it. Lyndon B. Johnson was the president then, and I shook his hand. And after I fixed my crew and me fixed the plane and checked it out, he got back on board and he shook my hand again and said, "We need men like you." And he left. It was one of my highlights of my career in the Air Force.
Overall, Robert Edris had a great time during his service, and he really enjoyed everywhere he went and everything he did. Even after his time in the military, he still contributes by belonging to the American Legion.
I belonged to the American Legion. I had helped with the Civil Air Patrol for quite a few years, and I was always around uh, military-minded people because of living here at Fort Indian Town Gap. You got to meet a lot of the Army boys and Air Force here at Fort Indian Town Gap.
This is how Airman First Class Robert Edris contributed to the United States military during his service and after his service.